the most dazzling city the ancient world ever dared to imagine. Towers that seem to lean toward the sky, gardens hanging like a green miracle above the dust, gates painted the color of midnight, guarded by golden beasts, and then, slowly, quietly, vanishing. Tonight, we're walking into Babylon, its rise, its golden century, and the long, mysterious fade into earth and legend. First, we'll trace how Babylon became more than a city. Then we'll step beneath the shadow of the famous tower and learn what it likely was in real life. And finally, we'll follow the clues that explain how a place can survive for thousands of years in memory while its streets disappear almost completely from the surface of the world. And if you fall asleep, that's perfectly fine. This channel is built for that too. But tell me, have you ever wondered how something can be so real in humanity's imagination, yet nearly impossible to hold in your hands? If you're ready, let's begin our descent into the corridors of Babylon, buried under time. Before we step through the first gate, a small invitation. If you enjoy these night journeys, slow history, quiet detail, and a calm place to think, consider liking the video and subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this map of night unfold. Different rooms, different countries, one shared quiet. Now dim the lights if you can. Let the screen be the only glow. Maybe turn on a fan, just enough to create that soft hum behind the words. And let your shoulders drop. You don't need to hold the day anymore. Picture this. You're standing on a wide Mesopotamian plain under a sky that feels almost too big. The air is warm, dry, carrying dust that tastes faintly like sun-baked clay. You can feel the openness here. The horizon doesn't end so much as it dissolves. And in the distance, not mountains, not forests, but something human. A low outline, a geometry of walls, a city shaped by water and stubborn will. Babylon. But when we say Babylon, we're not speaking of a single moment on a map. We're speaking of a deep civilization shaped across centuries in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is where writing first etched itself into clay, where early law became ink and stone, where city life learned to organize itself into rules, records, calendars, and power. Babylon didn't appear like a sudden sunrise. Before it, there were Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians. Many empires rose and fell in the same fertile cradle, and Babylon grew from their accumulated knowledge like a flame fed by countless older fires. Tonight, we won't rush. This is not history meant to feel like a sprint. We'll walk slowly and let the details settle. Because Babylon is not only a story of kings, it's a story of water, mud brick, and bureaucracy. It's a story of people trying to tame uncertainty by turning life into records. And if that sounds strangely modern, it's because it is. Listen to the room you're in, the faint electricity behind the screen, the soft hum of night. And imagine Babylon not as a headline, but as a soundscape. Water moving through a canal, footsteps on brick, distant voix, a dog barking behind a wall. History is not only dates, it is atmosphere. Before we reach Babylon's gates, we need to understand the land that birthed the idea of a city. Mesopotamia is not gentle land. It doesn't give life freely. It negotiates. In spring, rivers swell and break their banks, turning fields into sudden lakes. In summer, heat tightens the soil until it cracks like pottery left too long in fire. Sometimes the air becomes so still, it feels like the world is holding its breath. And yet, this is exactly why civilization blooms here. Because when life is uncertain, people begin to plan. They begin to measure. They begin to store. They begin to record. Water must be guided through canals. Grain must be stored. Work must be organized. Debts must be tracked. Families must be counted. Land must be measured. Time must be marked. And for that, you need something more powerful than strength. You need memory that can't forget. So people press language into clay, not to write poetry at first, but to write order. A mark for how many jars. A sign for how many sheep. A line for who owes what and when it must be paid. It's haunting to realize this. In Mesopotamia, writing begins as an answer to anxiety, a way of calming chaos by making it visible. And once you can make life visible, you can control it. You can build cities. You can build empires. Babylon rises on that quiet magic. Not gates, not legends. The patient, relentless act of turning a world into records. Long before Babylon glazes its bricks blue, the South is already ancient. In Sumer, cities like Uruk and don't feel like early attempts. They feel complete. Temples, markets, scribal schools, political drama. People stop moving with the seasons and begin to live inside walls. But walls create new problems. Food must arrive every day. Waste must be managed. Conflict must be contained. So institutions are born. Temples become economic engines, storing grain and redistributing rations. Rulers begin as administrators, then become kings. Priests become managers of storage, land, and labor. Then come the Akkadians, expanding the idea of conquest. A city is no longer just a city. It becomes a node in a larger map. Power shifts north and south like a tide. Dynasties rise and fall. Names change. Bardas bent, but the foundation remains. Canals, clay, and the human desire to keep building. Babylon grows inside that inheritance, like a seed in a field already fertilized by centuries. So, when Babylon becomes Babylon, it already knows the language of empire. It already knows how to count, how to command, how to archive. Now, let's locate it. Where was Babylon? In what is now Iraq, not far from modern Baghdad, resting beside the Euphrates like a jeweled vessel. The river gave Babylon everything: irrigation, food, transport, trade. It also gave it strategic importance at the crossroads between north and south, east and west. A location that could make a city rich and make enemies hungry. Even the name feels like a spell. Babylon is often linked to an Akkadian idea, meaning gate of the gods, a threshold, not just a settlement, a city designed around sacred presence. At its heart stood Esagila, the great temple complex dedicated to Marduk. But temple is too small a word. Esagila was worship and government, treasury and archive, prayer and policy, incense and accounting. And Babylon wasn't impressive only because of its gods. It was impressive because of its order. Straight avenues, planned districts, walls engineered on a scale people could barely describe without exaggeration. A city that looked like a diagram, carved into reality. But order like this doesn't come from air. Enter Hammurabi. In his reign, Babylon grows from a modest city-state into a serious power. And what he leaves behind is not only conquest, it is structure. His famous law code, carved on stone, lists hundreds of rulings: trade, property, marriage, injury, theft, debt. Punishments are clear. Responsibilities are defined. Society becomes something that can be written down. Yes, it includes the harsh principle we recognize as an eye for an eye. But it reveals something else. A world trying to be legible, trying to make life stable through rules and precedent. Law is not only shouted by kings. Law is stored, referenced, remembered. Imagine a dispute in a market stall. A merchant claims the silver is short. A buyer insists the scale is wrong. Voices rise. A small crowd forms. Someone calls for witnesses. Someone demands the scribe. Now picture the scribe arriving with clay. Wet, heavy, blank. It doesn't look powerful, but everyone steps back anyway. Because once he presses signs into clay, the argument becomes a fact. The tablet does not forget. The tablet does not get tired. The tablet cannot be sweet-talked. It sits there, patient, permanent, like a quiet judge. This is Babylon's true magic. Not prophecy, not myth, permanence. After Hammurabi, Babylon weakens and fractures. It is invaded, occupied, burned, rebuilt, again and again. Kassites, Elamites, Assyrians pass through its gates. Yet Babylon refuses to die. Because Babylon becomes more than bricks. It becomes identity, symbol, gravity. Even conquerors feel compelled to restore it, as if destroying it completely would curse the land itself. And then, centuries later, Nebuchadnezzar arrives like the final master builder of a dream. In the 6th century BCE, he transforms Babylon into a spectacle of power and beauty. New walls, new palaces, renewed temples. The city expands, strengthens, shines, and one structure becomes the face of Babylon in human imagination. The Ishtar Gate, glazed blue brick, decorated with striding lions and dragon-like beasts, leading into a processional way that cut through the city like a ceremonial river. During the New Year festival, Babylon turned into theater. Statues of gods carried through streets, hymns rising like smoke, offerings made in public, the city living as ritual, an entire metropolis designed to perform divine order. Nebuchadnezzar is also remembered for war, the conquest of Judah, the fall of Jerusalem, the deportation of many people into Babylon, the Babylonian exile. This is one reason Babylon becomes so charged in sacred literature. Magnificence and oppression, wonder and warning in the same breath. At its height, Babylon may have held a vast population, languages mixing in markets, merchants and priests, scribes and soldiers, artisans and enslaved workers, a world contained within walls. How do you manage such a machine? With writing, with records, with specialists. Scribes who could carve cuneiform into clay were priceless. Contracts, taxes, court decisions, sales, wages, everything documented and archived. And those tablets, found millennia later, revealed daily life. Arguments over debt, sales of houses, disputes between neighbors. The ordinary pulse of an extraordinary civilization. Let's walk it now. You approach the Ishtar Gate not as a tourist, but as someone living inside the city's rhythm. The bricks are not simply blue. They're deep glazed midnight, like the river at night when the moon disappears behind cloud. And the animals are not decorations. They are statements. Lions, strength, royalty, intimidation, hybrid beasts, fear and myth. Standing at the border between worlds. Under your feet, the processional road is hard and deliberate. This road was made for ritual. The city knows how to perform. It knows how to make people feel small. And that feeling is part of the design. In the distance, you hear drums. A hymn rises and falls like breath through crowds. Incense burns. Sweet, thick, heavy. And the air tastes like smoke and celebration. Babylon at its peak is not a place that merely exists. It stages reality. Now step away from palace grandeur and enter the daily pulse. Most houses were built from mud brick. Cheap, practical, constantly in need of repair. Wealthier families used fired brick, had courtyards, multiple rooms, sometimes early sanitation. But for many, life was compact. A small yard for cooking, a few vessels, woven mats, simple bedding, food, was humble. Barley bread, onions and garlic, vegetables, fish when available, meat mostly for festivals or wealth. And yes, beer was common, brewed from grain and dates, often safer than uncertain water supplies. In some cases, workers even received beer as part of daily pay. Education existed, but it was selective. A child who learned writing could become a scribe, a temple worker, an administrator, someone with social mobility. School meant repetition, signs, words, math problems pressed into wet clay until the hands learned precision. Medicine was real, though entwined with religion. Disease was often seen as spiritual disturbance as much as physical. Treatments combined herbs with incantations, observation with ritual. Tablets describe symptoms and prescribe remedies. Women's roles were complex, restricted by patriarchy, yet not entirely powerless. Some could own property, conduct business, seek divorce under certain conditions, serve in temple roles. Marriage was often contractual, shaped by family alliance as much as affection. Babylon was human, full of tenderness and harshness, hope and fear, just like any city. Let's meet three people. Not kings, not legends. Lives history almost forgets until tablets remember them. First, the brewer. In a courtyard, a woman stirs grain and water. Foam rises. The smell is sour-sweet, alive. Brewing is not glamour. It's nutrition, safety, wages. She knows the difference between a batch that calms the stomach and one that brings sickness. She knows how to stretch supplies when the season turns hard. Second, the merchant, tired, always tired. His wealth is movement. Donkeys, caravan, riverboats. He speaks in prices, routes, rumors. A road is safe until it isn't. A city is profitable until a tax changes. He fears bandits, yes, but he fears something quieter even more. A wrong promise written into clay. Because in Babylon, the tablet can trap you. Third, the student scribe, hands stained with clay dust, wrist aching from repetition. He has pressed the same sign 100 times until his fingers learned obedience. He learns writing is not just language, it is authority. If he becomes good, he may stand near priests, near administrators, near power. Not to become a king, but to become indispensable. Now breathe. Imagine you are that student, seated on a warm floor. Clay cool at first, then warming in your palms. The teacher's voice calm, strict, patient. You press signs until they become muscle memory. Outside, the city moves. Someone shouting a price, someone hammering metal, someone carrying water. A donkey braying in the distance. Babylon is an organism, and writing is its nervous system. With writing comes the archive. Somewhere in Babylon, a room smells like dry earth. Shelves, baskets, stacks of tablets. Not treasures in the shining sense, treasures in the terrifying sense. A vet, a marriage contract, a land sale, a list of wages paid to workers who carried bricks until their shoulders went numb. And what's eerie is how familiar it feels. People argue about rent. People accuse neighbors of cheating. People complain about late payments. Babylon is ancient. But human behavior doesn't age like stone. Now, the Tower. The Tower of Babel story describes humans building upward to challenge heaven, only for God to scatter them by confusing their languages. It is a symbolic tale of pride and limitation, but it likely echoes a real structure. Etamananki, a massive ziggurat in Babylon. Ziggurats were terraced temple towers, stair-stepped mountains made of brick. Etamananki may have risen to a stunning height for its era, though exact numbers are debated. It wasn't built merely to reach the sky in rebellion. It was built to stage connection, a sacred axis where earth and heaven were imagined to meet. Only priests could access the upper levels for rituals. Its presence declared Babylon's spiritual and political gravity. A ziggurat is not a skyscraper. It's staircase theology. Lower level, labor, dust, noise. Higher, silence, restricted space, ritual. You don't climb it to conquer heaven. You climb it to declare heaven is organized. And Babylon understands the organization. At night, when torches flicker below, the ziggurat becomes a shadow that looks less like architecture and more like a presence. Today, it is gone, dismantled over centuries, bricks reused, outlines swallowed by time. But the idea remains, louder than stone. And then, the Hanging Gardens, one of the ancient world's most famous wonders, and one of its most debated. Did they truly exist in Babylon? Or elsewhere? Or mostly in poetry? The legend says Nebuchadnezzar built them for his wife, longing for green mountains far from Mesopotamia's flat horizons. Terraced gardens, layered like a living pyramid, with trees and flowers thriving above the city. But archaeology hasn't produced definitive proof in Babylon. Some scholars argue the story may belong to Nineveh, linked to Assyrian kings, later confused through retelling. Yet, whether real or misattributed, the legend tells something true. People believed Babylon was capable of miracles. The gardens solve an emotional problem. Babylon is too brick, too dust, too sun. So the imagination plants softness inside it. A terrace of green above a city of clay becomes a symbol. Life suspended over harshness. Babylon was also a mind. Its priests were astronomers. Its rituals were calendars. Its mathematics still shapes your life. The base 6-0 system, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 360 degrees. Time carries Babylon inside it. And in Babylon, math is not detached play. It's prediction. The sky becomes ledger. The moon becomes schedule. Planetary movement becomes sign. They watch the heavens because everything on earth feels safer when the pattern above seems readable. Religion and science are braided. To study the heavens is to interpret divine language. Imagine you're on a rooftop. The city's noise is lower now, softened by night. A breeze moves through palm fronds. Somewhere below, a late voice calls, then fades. Above you, stars scatter like dust thrown across velvet. A priest astronomer watches quietly, not for romance, but for warning, for timing, for order. Babylon also carried shadows, omens, spirits, dreams interpreted as messages, protective rituals against curses, catalogs of signs and meanings. The unseen world felt near, always near. A city of markets and bricks, but also of signs. So how does a city like this end? Not with a single crash, more like a long exhale. Nebuchadnezzar dies, and the throne grows unstable. Rivalries multiply, confidence fractures, and a powerful force rises in the east. The Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, in 539 BCE, Cyrus takes Babylon. And strikingly, many accounts suggest the city offers little resistance. Internal dissatisfaction, political tension, disputes may have weakened the will to fight. Cyrus presents himself as a restorer, honoring traditions, respecting Marduk's cult, allowing displaced peoples to return home. Conquest framed as correction, not destruction. Babylon remains important under Persian rule, but it is no longer the center of the universe. It becomes one jewel among many, and there's a subtle tragedy in that. Because Babylon's greatness was always about centrality, about being the place where heaven leaned closest to earth. When centrality shifts, a city begins to become memory while still alive. Later, Alexander the Great enters Babylon. He admires it. Some traditions claim he planned to rebuild parts of it, perhaps even make it his capital. But Alexander dies, and his empire fractures. New capitals rise, trade routes change. A rival city draws people away. Babylon empties gradually. Without maintenance, canals clog. Mudbrick erodes. Walls collapse. The Euphrates shifts. Sand and silt cover what remains. By the early centuries of the Common Era, Babylon is no longer Babylon. It is ruins and whispers. And later still, even its location fades from certainty, until modern archaeology returns, slowly, uncovering streets, palaces, tablets, fragments of the gate. Yet Babylon returns only as a shadow, because so much was dismantled, looted, recycled, swallowed by time. So why did Babylon fall? Sacred texts speak of divine wrath. History speaks of politics, economics, shifting power, changing rivers, migration, and the slow relocation of the center. Perhaps these aren't as different as they sound. Sometimes divine punishment is simply what humans call the consequences of arrogance, misrule, neglect, imbalance. A civilization rots from within, and the outside world only finishes what the inside began. And Babylon teaches a final haunting lesson. Stone can be, but knowledge can outlive stone. Its walls collapsed, but its numbers remain in our clocks. Its tablets cracked, but their ideas shape law, science, record-keeping. Its tower fell, but the story climbed higher than any staircase ever could. Now imagine you're there. You pass beneath the blue brilliance of the Ishtar Gate. Glazed bricks shimmer like a night sea. Lions and dragons watch in silence. You walk the processional road toward the temple heart of the city. In the distance, the great ziggurat rises, layer by layer, like a man-made mountain. The Euphrates moves calmly beside the walls. The sun lowers. The city turns gold. Voices echo in markets. A drumbeat from a festival drifts through evening air. And for a moment, you stand where millions once stood, at what they believed was the center of the world. Maybe Babylon is gone from the surface, but it is not gone from us. Some cities disappear into dust, and yet they remain inside the mind of humanity, like a dream you can't quite forget. So if your eyes are getting heavy now, let them close. Let Babylon fade gently into the dark soil of time, where mysteries sleep. Good night and sweet dreams. But before the night fully closes around us, let's return once more, deeper into the living city. Because Babylon is often remembered as monument or myth, yet the true Babylon, the one that breathed, lived in ordinary rhythms. Imagine the city at dawn, not dramatic dawn, just practical dawn. The moment when heat has not yet arrived, and every sound carries farther. In courtyards, people move quietly. A clay oven warms. A child carries water in a small jar that sloshes as he walks. Somewhere, an animal complains, goats or sheep, impatient for feed. Markets wake like a creature stretching. Stalls assemble, baskets, cloth, weights, scales. The smell of crushed herbs, of bread, of damp river air. Arguments begin early. A buyer insists the price was lower yesterday. A seller insists yesterday is gone. Above it all, administration hums. Temple personnel count. Scribes write. Deliveries arrive. Workers queue for rations. And somewhere behind a wall, private, unseen, someone is simply trying to survive the day. The ancient city is not always grand. It's often just crowded. At noon, heat thickens, shadows sharpen, footsteps slow. Even voices change. Less playful, more clipped, because the body protects itself. The city becomes a place of shade. People move under awnings, under anything that softens the sun. Then evening, the air loosens. The river smell returns. Cooking smoke rises. The soundscape changes. More laughter, more movement, more life returning to the streets. Night is when Babylon becomes soft, not safe necessarily, but softer. And the sky opens again. Stars above a city that has always tried to translate them. Babylon's beauty was built from something humble. Mud. Mud brick is cheap, accessible, and fragile. It requires constant care, and that is the secret. Babylon survives as long as people keep repairing it. Walls do not stay proud on their own. They slump, crack, erode. So maintenance becomes culture. A city doesn't just build, it rebuilds endlessly. And water. Water is everything. Canals must be cleared, banks reinforced, irrigation negotiated between neighbors, districts, temples. The river is blessing and threat, sometimes in the same week. Imagine a canal worker, knee-deep in silt, pulling weeds by hand. No romance, no myth, just labor. And yet, without that labor, Babylon becomes dust. In a way, the real hanging miracle is not gardens. It's the continued existence of a city in a landscape that constantly tries to erase it. Once a year, the city becomes theater in the purest sense. Not only celebration, renewal, a ritual reboot of cosmic order. Priests prepare, routes are cleaned, people gather. The statue of Marduk, heavy with meaning, moves through streets. Hymns rise, drums pulse like a second heartbeat. And the king's power is not assumed. It is performed. He must demonstrate humility before the divine order he claims to protect. He must be seen as accountable to something higher. In that moment, the city watches not only its gods, but its ruler. For ordinary people, this is both sacred and practical. Because when order is renewed, hope is renewed. The year might be harsh. Floods may come. Prices may rise. War may whisper in distant provinces. But for a moment, the city declares, we are still here. We are still aligned. We have not fallen into chaos yet. Return again to the rooftop. The priest astronomer holds a small tablet. He looks up, then down, comparing the sky to memory. He knows the moon is not only a light, it's a clock. He knows a planet is not only a wandering star, it's a sentence. And as he records movements, he is doing something deeply human, trying to make uncertainty negotiable, trying to turn the future into something you can prepare for. Even if preparation is only a prayer, cities don't always fall in fire. Sometimes they fall in silence. One canal is left uncleared. Water slows. Silt gathers. Fields suffer. People move. A shop closes. A district empties. The city shrinks not in one dramatic moment, but in many small endings. Mud brick needs attention the way a living body needs food. Stop feeding it, and it returns to earth. So Babylon's disappearance is not mysterious if you understand its material. It is tragic, but logical. A city of clay will always want to become clay again. Imagine the first time modern hands uncover a brick that once faced the processional road. Dust brushed away carefully, a glaze hinting at blue, a fragment of an animal's curve. It must feel like touching a dream, like proving imagination had bones. Yet archaeology also reveals something sobering. So much is gone. Not stolen in one raid, but recycled by generations. A brick used again, a stone moved, a wall dismantled for another wall, history eating itself to survive. And now, one last time, return to the Ishtar Gate in your mind, not as tourist, as a quiet listener. Let the blue glow exist in the dark behind your eyelids. Let the lions stand there, still. Let the city's voices fade into distance. Let the Euphrates move calmly beside the walls. and notice what Babylon becomes in the end. Not a place you can stand inside, a feeling you can visit, a corridor of human memory, a dream you can return to when the night is heavy. Good night, and sweet dreams.